So I finally got around to canceling my Paramount Plus subscription because half the time that thing didn't even work.
Freaking, I was just thinking about that yesterday. I don't even know if I'm subscribed to it or not, but I'm sure it's draining me of money somehow.
Yeah, I would always forget until I got the email saying my payment was made.
Did you do like just like a monthly thing, or?
Yeah, I did it for a year, but because it was so flaky, I just stopped using it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of streaming companies bank on you just not thinking about it and charging you.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
So when I logged in and jumped through all the hoops to cancel, it asked for a reason. And one of the radio buttons was technical difficulties. So I clicked that one. Then I clicked confirm cancellation. And I got an error saying something went wrong. Please try again later. So at least they're consistent.
Unfortunately. My dad was trying to watch A Man Called Otto on Netflix, and I went down to because I pay for Netflix for us, I went down to the ad-supported version or whatever, because it's cheaper, and it would not let him watch it on that version. You had to pay for a higher version in order to watch it, which I thought was ridiculous.
Yeah. And Netflix is not the only one that does that.
Yeah, I knew there were other, like with Hulu or like what I hate about Prime in particular is Prime will show you everything that you can possibly access through there, even if you have to pay for each movie. And for somebody old like my dad, they don't know what the hell they're looking at, and they just keep trying to click on everything. It's like, well, I can't watch this, I can't watch this, I can't watch this. I hate that so much.
Yay, streaming.
Just another reason to support physical media.
Oh, yeah. Not
that we don't have enough. I will never understand people that are like, well, you can just stream it. Why would I buy it? Yeah, how do you know that it's still going to be available there? How are you going to know that it's probably not going to have any of the bonus features that are on the DVDs or whatever. So if you care about the background of the movie at all, then you're not going to get that out of streaming.
Right. So what did you check out this month?
Well, this was a terrible month. I didn't have time for a lot of stuff. I mean, almost all of my time was preparing for moving, so...
I'll make up for it, don't worry.
Okay. The first movie I watched, you were talking about all these DC movies that you've been watching lately, and I got curious, which turned out to be a huge mistake.
So you had such limited time, so you decided to watch something bad.
Yeah, well, because I kind of thought maybe I could just kind of leave it on and work on stuff, but it ended up being so bad that I focused on it the whole time. It was Green Lantern from 2011.
Oh, man.
Which was way worse than I thought it was going to be.
Did I talk about this?
Yeah, you did at some point, yeah. It was terrible right from the start, filled with really bad jokes through the entire thing. It felt like a 90s studio movie, like a 90s superhero adaptation or something, but it's from 2011, other than all the CGI, which unfortunately, that felt like 2000. Okay, first of all, casting Ryan Reynolds as Hal Jordan. I don't know whose idea that was, but that was terrible. His character in the movie, it feels like they're trying to go for a Tony Stark thing. Well, they clearly are. That was 2008. The movie even starts out with him sleeping with some random girl, and they act like that's going to be part of his character, but it comes up one other time when Carol Ferris is like, yeah, you're like sleeping with random women or whatever, but it doesn't affect his character at all. It doesn't make any difference. They could have cut that out and it wouldn't change anything. And his whole thing of Hal Jordan is supposed to be without fear or whatever. That's why he's chosen by the Ring, but that doesn't come across in the movie. But that's a part of the plot, but it doesn't work in the movie. There's no sense of him overcoming anything or whatever. The whole thing just feels super generic, but also really, really bad. So definitely do not recommend. And I had so many questions. I guess this is true for the comics too, but so many questions about how the Ring worked and the constructs that it made and all that kind of stuff. I was mostly just kind of confused. So, yeah, that was that. I watched Croaked, Frog Monster from Hell from 1980, which was originally titled Rana, the Legend of Shadow Lake, and Rana is just frog in Spanish, but in the movie, it's the name of this frog monster god that lives in a lake and, I don't know, was worshipped by the natives or whatever, and I can't remember if they even explained where it came from or what it was. It was like a half human, half frog creature that you don't see it until the very end of the movie. When the movie started, it said something like Trauma Presents or something, and I was like, okay, this could be good or it could be terrible. But it turned out they didn't make it, they just distributed it. It was made by some guy that's known for making low-budget horror crap. And this movie was low-budget horror crap. The only thing it had going for it was some gore, but there wasn't nearly enough. The rest of the movie was really boring, really like somebody said, well, I guess I'm going to shoot a movie. And then they did it, technically. And the one part that was really funny for me was there's a character. I mean, I don't know if you can call anybody in this movie a character, but there was a character that was a paleontologist, I think, and she was researching prehistoric frogs or something. And there's I don't know, it's not quite an exposition scene, but there's a scene where she's talking about her background or something, or what she's doing, or I don't know. And she refers to frogs as reptiles at one point, I think, and she makes up all this science crap that doesn't make sense and feels like an episode of TNG, but it was so far off from being accurate that it was the funniest thing in the movie by far. It was great. The most entertaining scene in the movie by far.
But played up as serious.
Yes. And just as if she knew what she was talking about. She was speaking very authoritatively. And it's like, yeah, well, like other reptiles, frogs live in the water. It's like, oh, give me a break. So yeah, the movie was terrible. The ending, by the time I got to the end, okay, I actually started this movie probably a couple months ago and totally forgot about it. That's how much of an impression it was making on me when I was watching it. So when I went back, I didn't know everything that was going on anymore. And by the time I got to the very end, there was a shock ending kind of thing. But I don't know what it was. I don't know what was supposed to be happening, because either it was, I mean, it could have been my fault, it could have been the movie's fault, it was probably a little of both, but it was some kind of weird twist thing of, oh, the monster's still alive, but I didn't know it was supposed to be dead, or something, I'm not sure. So anyway, that's another movie that I would not recommend. I rewatched Dune from 2021, because the sequel is about to come out. We already did a whole video on that. All I'll say is, I liked it more the second time, watching it just as a movie and not thinking of it as an adaptation. I thought it actually worked surprisingly well in that way, because I felt like they were leaving a lot of things out. The first time I kind of thought it would be a little confusing for people that hadn't read the book, but it wasn't. I thought it worked. That's everything I watched. I read Moby Dick by Herman Melville from 1851. So a long time ago, at some point, I talked about reading Billy Budd by Melville and how it completely met my expectations of being very long-winded, lots of tangents, taking forever to get back to the story. He even apologizes for his tangents in the book.
Yeah, I remember you talking about that.
Yeah, pretty slow and lots of long sentences that were hard to read. It took me a long time to get used to his style in that book. So all my expectations were based on what people said about Moby Dick. So I said, okay, I know what to expect now. It's just going to be a lot longer. So I was very surprised that a lot of those things did not apply to Moby Dick, but this is the book that they say those things about. And I think a lot of the reason that people have those opinions about it, that it's slow, that it's ponderous, that it meanders, is because they go to it with expectations already that that's what it's going to be, because it's an old book and because they have to read it for school and whatever. I was surprised right from the start of chapter 1, where the very first paragraph of the book, I was already laughing. And it's a paragraph about Ishmael, the narrator, talking about how he's contemplating suicide, so he's going to go get on a boat. And that doesn't sound funny, but in the book, the way he says it is really funny. And that made the entire book, the fact that he's the narrator, everything is from his perspective. The entire book was very entertaining. It was really funny, especially in the first, maybe third. And it actually takes a long time before you get to the boat. So people that are focused on the story would be right in saying that it meanders, that it goes all over the place. But I would argue that that's not what the book is about. That's not the point of reading it. That would be kind of like, I was comparing it while I was reading it. I was thinking of Pulp Fiction, where if you take out all the, what people would call extraneous scenes and get down just to the plot, there wouldn't be a whole lot there. And it would be boring. And there wouldn't be any point in watching it. But what makes it work is the character scenes, is the jokes, is all the stuff in between. It's the experience of watching it. It's not just the experience of knowing what the story is, because that's not what it is. And it's the same with Moby Dick. If people go into it wanting a story about a guy hunting a whale, you don't get to the boat until more than a quarter of the way in. You don't even meet Captain Ahab until after that. So you're going to be disappointed probably. But everything along the way, maybe not everything, but the majority of it along the way is super funny, super entertaining. A lot of people get turned off by the level of detail that he goes into in terms of whaling practices and what it's like to be on the ship and all the equipment and all the procedures and everything. I thought it was really interesting. And again, the fact that Ishmael is the narrator is part of what makes it so good. He makes genuinely witty comments and witty connections between a lot of things, but he also is not very smart. He's kind of an idiot.
But he doesn't realize he's an idiot.
Right. He misinterprets things a lot. And that is also a big source of the humor. And I think in particular of when he meets Queequeg pretty early on in the book. Queequeg is one of the harpooners who comes from like a cannibal tribe. And Queequeg was probably my favorite character. I wish he got more, I'll call it screen time. I guess that's my biggest complaint, is that the characters take a backseat to the descriptions and sort of philosophical digressions. The philosophical stuff is somewhat interesting sometimes. A lot of it, I think a lot of people don't get. I've seen a lot of places online and stuff where this book is quoted as if it's Melville speaking, but I don't think Melville would be speaking through a character that he is characterizing as an idiot. I don't think he wants people to have the stuff that Ishmael is saying be taken as stuff that he himself is saying. But it was making me think of Edgar Allan Poe that way too, where people don't seem to get the humor. And I've talked to people that read this book and didn't think it was funny. But even some of those philosophical things where you'll go through an entire chapter of what the color white means, what the whiteness of the whale signifies or whatever, and he'll throw out all these weighty things, and then he'll start throwing in some completely ridiculous stuff, and people apparently don't see the difference. They think it's all that you're supposed to take it seriously, but a lot of it is there because it's funny. And that goes for not just the narration, but even the things that happen in the story and the way the characters are. All the characters are super over the top. Even Ahab is a ridiculous character, and they're great. That's what makes it so entertaining. So yeah, there's hunting a whale in there. There's a lot of whale hunting scenes, actually. Moby Dick doesn't actually show up until pretty late in the book. Very late in the book. And my biggest complaint, besides that the characters I wish were a little bit more prevalent at times, was that the ending was just too abrupt. It just kind of ends all of a sudden, and I was like, I wanted more resolution. It seemed like it would make more sense for Ishmael to think about everything that has happened a little bit more, given that that's what the entire book is, just him thinking about everything, but you don't really get it at the end. So I would definitely recommend people check it out. It's not nearly as long as it seems like it's going to be. Start just from chapter 1. If you don't think it's funny by the end of like the first page, then you're not going to like it because you're not going to get the humor. It's not going to be your thing. But I would definitely recommend people at least try it out and go in knowing that it has that tone, because I think a lot of people, again, they go in with their expectations and then they kind of confirm their expectations because that's how they read it. They're not reading it actively. They're just kind of saying like, well, I'm just going to try to get through it. But if you read it as an enjoyable thing, maybe you'll actually enjoy it. I read The Troop from 2014 by Nick Cutter. Nick Cutter is a pseudonym for some other guy. I guess it's the same guy, but it's a pseudonym. This is a horror book about a group of Canadian Boy Scouts, or I assume they're Canadian. Maybe they're American, but they're in Canada. I don't know. But they're on this island, isolated with their troop master, and they're going to be there to get merit badges or whatever. But there's a big storm that comes in, and actually, maybe the storm comes later. But this weird guy arrives on a boat by himself, and he seems to be kind of wasting away, but he can't stop eating. And he's eating stuff that is not food. He's just eating whatever he can get his hands on. And it turns out I won't spoil anything, but it turns out he has a weird infection that, of course, starts spreading. And the entire island, they're isolated there. So the entire thing becomes a survival story, but from the perspective of kids. So it reminded me of a lot of other things, like It, which I talked about not that long ago. One of the kids is a really creepy weirdo. That becomes a major part of the story. Very much Lord of the Flies. I was thinking of The Ruins by Scott Smith.
Your synopsis made me think of like a Kazuo Umezu story.
Oh yeah, definitely. I could see that. Like The Ruins, there was a lot of really good body horror stuff, of things getting inside you and coming out of you and doing all kinds of weird stuff. And when I finished the book and I get to the end, in his acknowledgments, the author basically names off all those things, and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. It was definitely good. There were just a few little issues I had with it along the way, but they were minor enough that I would definitely recommend people check it out if you think that sounds interesting. And if you're into body horror, weird, creepy, gross stuff.
Was that a joke? Because they're children, they're minors?
Where's the joke?
You said I had a couple of minor complaints.
Oh, no, that was not a joke.
Oh.
I'm not like you. I'm not looking for puns in every possible opportunity.
Well, nobody's perfect.
But it was good. Definitely check it out if you're into that kind of thing. And then I played Yakuza Kiwami a little bit. This was a remake of the original Yakuza game.
What was this on?
I played it on PS4. I don't know how far I got into it. I went in thinking it was kind of what I had always heard was that it's like a Japanese Grand Theft Auto. So I was disappointed that there is so much focus on the story and not very much interactivity with the environment. You can walk around wherever you want, but there's not really anything to do.
How many games in this series have you played?
Just this one. This is the first time I've tried one.
Okay, because I think they change quite a bit as they go on.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering, because again, being a remake of the first one, I don't know how close they tried to stick to the original and maybe just give it updated graphics, or if they tried to modernize things, I don't know. The combat felt a lot like the Batman Arkham games, and I thought it was cool the way you can switch between different styles on the fly. I thought they came up with a good way to make that work. And I've never been a huge fan of Grand Theft Auto because of the fact that you play as a criminal, that being a criminal is part of the appeal of those games, I guess, and that just doesn't appeal to me as a person.
Yeah, you like to do it in real life.
Yeah. So I did like that the main character seems to not be into that whole thing, even though he's a Yakuza member. He seems to kind of want to fix things and kind of get out of it, and I don't know, turn it from a crime thing to something else. I don't know. He has a sense of justice, I guess, that made it more appealing for me.
Well, maybe when you get to Japan, you can kind of try and bring that across when you inevitably join up.
Yeah. I don't know what their policy is on taking foreigners, so we'll see how it goes.
They're probably fans of the channel. They'd make an exception.
I mean, we do have all those Godzilla videos.
This is going to be our last video because we're both going to be assassinated.
Yeah. So I don't know. It was disappointing, but I can't say it was bad. It just wasn't what I was hoping it was going to be. Also, I couldn't stop looking at the female character's hands because it looks like they modeled the female character and then they said, oh crap, we forgot to give them hands. So they just took the male character hands and just attached them to the end of their arms, so they have like these giant hands.
Man hands?
It was very distracting, yeah.
I mean, you have watched Seinfeld, so I can't relate that episode to you.
Okay, good. So yeah, I don't know. Disappointing. I'll keep trying it. I did buy a whole bunch of them because they were all on sale for like super cheap. So, I'll try some of them down the road. But yeah, it was disappointing. So that's everything I had time for this month. What did you check out?
I watched The Incredible Melting Man from 1977. Have you seen this one?
Surprisingly, I have not. I've heard of it, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, okay. It's been on my list for a long time. I finally got around to it, and there were some things that were way better than I expected, and some things that were exactly where I thought they'd be. This dude goes up into space, he passes through Saturn's rings with his crew, but he runs into unknown trouble, and ends up back on Earth as the only survivor, and the only snag is that he is slowly melting. Rick Baker handled the special effects, and they were good. I was impressed. Rob Bottin actually used this movie as inspiration for when that one dude gets covered in toxic waste in RoboCop.
Okay.
So the movie is pretty much this guy stumbling around, and his mental capabilities are shot, so he can't communicate, he can't really think, and the movie tells us he needs human cells to stop melting, so he goes around killing people. This was originally supposed to be a callback to 50s horror movies with a lot of tongue-in-cheek moments, and I can definitely see that. Unfortunately, before it was released, it was taken over by higher-ups in the studio and completely reworked into a quote-unquote serious film, which was a huge mistake and caused the whole thing to have a very inconsistent tone. Originally, you weren't going to know anything about the Melting Man, and at the very end you'd find out he was human, and he was an astronaut, and he had recently returned from space. But in the reworked version, they shot an entirely new opening sequence of the dude in his space shuttle going through Saturn's rings. They also shuffled all of the scenes around, and Rick Baker had originally done 4 stages of melting. So as the movie progressed, you would see it happening. But since all the scenes got shuffled around, that didn't work. So the visuals are inconsistent throughout the whole thing. The acting was very campy, which again was intentional because it was supposed to be a 50s callback, but because they tried to make it a serious movie, it just made the acting really bad. I wonder if it had been released as intended. No, I don't wonder. If it had been released as intended, it would have been way better. Worth watching for the special effects and knowing what it could have been.
Okay.
I watched Animal Farm, the animated version from the 50s that was secretly funded by the CIA. Do you know about this?
I seem to remember hearing about it a long time ago, but I don't know the details or anything.
Yeah, they were so concerned about secrecy that only one American was involved in the production at all. If you haven't read Animal Farm, it is a 40s satirical political novel by George Orwell, where his views on the Russian Revolution and the Stalinist structure is represented by animals on a farm who are revolting against the human regime. Even though this animated version is from 1954, it has been shown in schools for decades, probably still up to today. And since it was handled by the CIA, there were definitely changes from the source material, including the entire ending, so just know that going in. It was well animated though. It wasn't a cheap Hanna-Barbera level thing. I think it's worth checking out from a historical perspective, and if you haven't read the book, I'd recommend that too. I never saw it as a kid in school, but we did watch the 99 live-action version.
Live action?
Yeah, it has some pretty good puppetry by Jim Henson.
Okay.
But also some absolutely egregious early CGI, because that was 1999. And it also deviates quite a bit from the source material. I watched Twin Dragons from 1992, which is a Jackie Chan film where he plays twins separated at birth, which is a very 90s thing, seemingly all over the world in terms of movies. One is a street tough, and the other is a concert pianist. And they eventually get mixed up, and their associates don't know who's who, and hilarity ensues. It's not that good. It's one of those Jackie Chan movies where you watch for a while, and you say, alright, let me skip ahead to the big creative fight scene near the end.
Yeah, I tried to watch that one time, and I didn't make it through.
So the big fight scene is in a Mitsubishi testing facility. So there's a bunch of machines and test equipment incorporated into the fighting, which is cool, but it is very skippable. I watched Payback from 1999. Have you seen this one?
No, is that the one with Mel Gibson?
Yeah. So he's a career criminal, and in the movie he's also a career criminal. But he gets double-crossed and supposedly killed, but he's not dead, and he wants payback. It felt like someone was writing an exploitation movie, but had second thoughts and wanted it to be more legitimate. So they threw in standard early 2000s romance junk that felt really out of place and hurt the pacing of the movie. The fun parts were really fun though, and they were almost Robert Rodriguez-like. Supposedly, this movie is a remake of Point Blank with Lee Marvin from '67. And I want to see that one because I have a hard time believing the style and explosiveness of this movie happened in 1967. There is an alternate director's cut because the original director was kicked off, and that movie even has a different title. It's called Straight Up. And I read that the rewrite for Payback, which is about a third of the movie, was to make Mel Gibson's character more accessible. But that was the part of the movie that didn't work. I'm very interested to seek out this director's cut because I think it would be way better and way more entertaining. Mel Gibson's character has a Lethal Weapon type personality where he doesn't really care that he's getting beat up. He's just annoyed it's taken him so long for him to get his money. And as the 90s tagline says, get ready to root for the bad guy. So ridiculous. The entire movie, he's surrounded by all of these people trying to monologue him and be all serious, and he's just rolling his eyes going, would you just get on with it? You're not even listening to what I'm saying. And then he'll end up gaining the upper hand and killing them, and then he'll call the next guy up on the chain who will do the exact same thing. It was pretty funny. For lack of a better term, the good parts of this movie were cool. You could see where someone was going to get blown up or whatever, and the build-up to it was good, and when it happened, you were like, yes! It's that kind of movie. It's not supposed to be a serious movie, so rewriting a third of it to make it a serious movie was a mistake. Lucy Liu is in this one, and she is a leather-wearing dominatrix.
Interesting.
Like I said, it's a very exploitative-feeling movie. I would hope that the director's cut really leans into that.
Yeah, you're making it sound way more interesting than I thought it would be.
Yeah, I watched it just because I don't really know. I said, I'll give it a shot. And then once I kind of got into it, I was like, man, this is way better than I thought. The only part that was in the rewrite that felt like it fit was Chris Christopherson, who first appears. Oh, his character introduction was so great. He's working out and flexing and just being a total badass while he's on the phone talking about assassinating people. And he's the main villain of the movie. But he was added after the original movie was finished. The original main villain was a woman who was only heard over the phone. But I think that also would have worked.
Who directed this?
Originally, before getting kicked off.
Oh yeah, so what? I don't know. I'm definitely gonna look this up. This sounds interesting.
I watched North by Northwest from 1959, which I assume you've seen.
Correct.
I have not before right now, but I like Hitchcock stuff in general. I wasn't expecting the comedic tone, which is prominent for a huge part of this movie, and it eventually swings towards a more serious direction, but at first, I wasn't sure what kind of movie this was. Plot-wise, a guy is mistaken as a spy, which means he's trailed, captured, interrogated, and despite him telling all these people he's not who they think he is, they're like, oh, there's no point in trying to fool us. And he spends the movie trying to evade these people, while at the same time trying to find out who the spy actually is. And I don't want to give too much away, because that's the movie, and it's a good movie, you should watch it. But I thought it was pretty damn long for the story it was telling.
It's been a while, but yeah, I remember thinking that. I also remember thinking that the introduction of the romance plot was very awkward.
Yes, I totally agree. I think maybe that was just a period thing.
Yeah, I think maybe it was the kind of thing where it's just like, that's what the audience expects, so we're just going to kind of get to it.
Bunch of 50s romance, smooth talking, where people have this conversation with very clever movie dialogue, and it ends up in sex, even though they met 10 minutes ago, and then they're in love, despite all of the events happening around them.
Not my kind of thing.
And this movie gets put on lists of, like, the best movies of all time. And I thought it was good, but for me personally, I would not put it on that list.
I agree. It's not one of the Hitchcock movies that I keep going back and rewatching. I've only seen it once.
I watched The General from 1926, which is a silent movie comedy starring and directed by Buster Keaton as a Southern Railroad operator during the Civil War. And it's based on a book from 1889, which recounted actual events back in 1862.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, so the Union Army stole a Confederate train and took it north to cut off Confederate supply trains. And Buster Keaton, who was denied enlistment because he was more valuable as an engineer, vows to get his stolen train back. And he chases them and gets chased by them in a variety of ways, and it was very funny. And he's balancing that with a romantic subplot where he's trying to redeem himself to his crush, who's under the impression that he's a coward, which is why he's not enlisted. And I watched a Blu-ray release, and it looked so good. I was not around in 1926, but I know picture quality was not great. And it's just crazy how good technology is to improve that picture quality to what it is now. The score was not the original one. It was one composed in 1987, but it was still really good. Even though the movie is a comedy, the music did not take the easy way out and use dumb cues. There were motifs sprinkled throughout the whole thing, mixed with folk tunes, and it was a very solid composition. The stunts were good, and I haven't seen too many silent movies, but I know Buster Keaton is known for stunt stuff. I think that one shot that always pops up is the house front falling on him, where he's in the window opening. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
A lot of very close calls for some of these stunts, and they would have required a lot of precision to pull off. And for 1926, this movie had a lot more creative cinematography and direction than I expected.
I feel like a lot of people get turned off by, like, it's a silent movie, like, the only reason to watch it is historical significance or something like that. But no, it's a really entertaining movie. Check it out.
Yeah, for sure. I watched The Good Shepherd from 2006, which was a movie directed by Robert De Niro about the formation of the CIA. Matt Damon is a college kid in the 1930s who gets recruited to be a spy, and it follows him all the way through to heading up the formation of the CIA's counterintelligence unit in the 60s. Since it covers so many years, there's a lot going on, and the movie does not move chronologically either. Matt Damon is struggling with his job responsibilities and having a wife he doesn't love and a son he doesn't spend time with, so that's his whole personal conflict. He and everyone else are always paranoid, questioning everything. They're always trying to stay 2 steps ahead of their counterparts in other agencies. Things are not what they seem. Very spy heavy. It was a lot to pack into 3 hours, and there were a lot of things that did not get enough time. But for what it was, the movie was competently handled. I think the biggest negative for me was because there was only so much runtime. In every scene, everyone had to hit their emotional and expositional peak immediately, but making it longer probably would not have been a good move either, because it was already 3 hours. I thought it was pretty good for being De Niro's first directed movie, I think.
See, you say 3 hours, Robert De Niro, and I'm just like, eh.
Yeah, but he's only in it for 5 minutes.
Okay. I mean, I don't know. Like, I just think of what type of movie that is, and I'm just like, I don't know.
It felt by the numbers of a 2000s movie.
Well, there you go. I ain't gonna watch it.
I watched Intruder from 1989. I assume you've seen this one.
Yes, now there's a movie that I love.
So this is a slasher film written and directed by Scott Spiegel, who wrote Evil Dead 2. And both Sam and Ted Raimi are actors in this movie.
And Bruce Campbell.
I'm going to talk about that.
Okay.
From a direction and cinematography perspective, this had Evil Dead written all over it. There were so many creative and experimental shots that just worked. And for something like a slasher movie, especially in the 80s, you need things like that to keep the movie interesting. Because there's 1,000 slasher movies coming out every year.
And most of them really suck.
Yeah. This one is in a grocery store after hours and involves all of the employees. It's not too hard to figure out who the killer is, but I liked the use of all the grocery store's different environments and the goofy kills using those environments, and the general direction made this movie much more compelling. I watched the full moon release of this movie, which did not cut anything out, which was good because K&B did the effects and they were sweet. Yeah, and Bruce Campbell is listed high in the credits. He's on all the posters and crap, but he only shows up in the epilogue scene for 30 seconds. So I thought it was a mistake to credit him just because he's more well-known. And Sam and Ted Raimi are also not prominent characters, but at least they have more than one scene. I would definitely recommend this, especially if you're a fan of Evil Dead 1 or 2. And vibe-wise, it's closer to 1. There's really not that much slapstick humor that you have in 2. You have any thoughts?
No, I agree. It's a really cool, unfortunately obscure at this point movie, so it's definitely one of those hidden gems, I think.
I agree. Okay, you might have seen this one. Have you seen Street Trash from 1987?
No, but I saw that it was on Tubi, so I will probably check it out sometime.
This is a gross-out body horror movie where bottles of alcohol are found hidden behind a basement panel in a liquor store, and the shop owner decides to put them out. But it turns out that when you drink it, it causes you to melt spectacularly in multiple colors and or explode. It gets circulated amongst Brooklyn's homeless population, so that's the main plot line. And subplots include relationships between the homeless characters, like a young kid and his brother. There's this crazed Vietnam vet who runs a gang out of a local junkyard. There's a woman who works at the junkyard. And there's this crazy cop who was hell-bent on stopping the Vietnam vet. The movie was nuts. It was definitely gross. And there were really no redeeming characters at all. I read a good quote. Something like, you initially think it's going to show how the homeless are trashy, but it turns out that the movie shows you how just everybody is trashy. It would be a good midnight movie to watch with a group. And the scene that gets talked about the most is when a guy gets his cut off and a bunch of homeless people keep throwing it around, playing catch with it.
Would you say it was a good movie, though? Was it more satisfying than Body Melt?
I don't really remember Body Melt. That was early in our channel. Why the hell did we choose that one?
Because it sounded weird, I think. I don't remember.
I watched a 1974 comedy called The Front Page, which was based on a play from 1928. Jack Lemmon is a Chicago newspaper reporter who decides to quit and move to Philadelphia because he's getting married. But his editor, Walter Matthau, doesn't want him to, and then an escaped convict falls right into Lemon's lap. So he has to decide whether to take up the story of a lifetime or to leave his career and move on with his life. The dialogue was very snappy. Lemon and Mathau pair well together, but the story went on for too long, and some of the comedic bits did not land, which made it especially hard for the ones that required a long build-up. The biggest misstep in this movie was Carol Burnett, who plays a completely straight and dramatic character in the middle of a comedy. And it's Carol Burnett, so if you would expect anyone to showcase some comedy, it would be her.
Yeah.
She has this big dramatic speech, and then she hurls herself out of a window to her death.
I mean, that's funny.
No, but see, that's the thing. It's not a joke. It was supposed to be this huge show of the injustices of this and that. Her speech is very serious, and you would think, yeah, her throwing herself out a window would be pretty funny, but it wasn't portrayed as funny. I would not recommend this movie. I watched Ready Player One from 2018.
Oh.
I want you to imagine every conversation you've ever had with someone who feels the compulsion to one-up every statement you make, regardless of the topic. This is that in movie form. We all enjoy certain aspects of pop culture from one era or another, but that's all it is. It's enjoyment. To treat it like it's a competition to see who enjoys it the most is so annoying, and I can't stand people like that.
Agreed.
The movie is set in 2060 or whatever, but the only popular stuff is from the 70s through the early 90s, because that's what the author of the book enjoyed. And that's weird. It doesn't make much sense in context, but neither does the plot of this movie in general. The entire world thrives on these pop culture references. And in case you weren't aware of how much the author wants you to know, how much they know, there are legit conversations between characters in this movie where they explicitly call out references of things sequentially. It brought attention to stuff in the most inorganic way possible, and it was terrible. Characters use pop culture references to prove their worth in life. Have you read the book?
No, I had no interest.
Yeah, me neither. So VR is a thing in the future, but it's hyped up to Matrix levels. And everybody in the world is plugged in, from children to senior citizens. And this virtual world is the most powerful and money-making enterprise in the history of mankind. It was created by the world's biggest nerd, and before he died, he inserted an Easter egg. And in case you don't know what an Easter egg is, the movie will explain it to you over a 15-minute speech. And whoever finds the 3 keys will uncover this Easter egg and receive complete control over the entire virtual world, which effectively means the real world too. So there's this huge effort to unearth these 3 keys, from casual players to multi-billion-dollar corporations that have armies of players scouring this game. And you would think, well, wouldn't it be helpful to investigate the actual guy's life to find clues? And you would be right. And there's an entire museum dedicated to this guy's life. But it is abandoned because, according to the movie, it's been investigated so thoroughly that there's nothing left to discover. But the main character, who is played by a guy pretending to be way younger than he actually is, figures out from a conversation that this big nerd had, where he wishes you could just turn back time and go backwards, comes to the realization that in this big Mario Kart type race, instead of trying to reach the finish line like normal, which has been unsuccessful by everybody, you have to instead at the beginning of the race go backwards at the start. So he does, and he finds the first key, which kickstarts the rest of the world to follow his lead, and it's a race against the man in the form of the bad guy's big corporation to find these remaining keys. So the entire story is basically a quest in a shitty PS1 game. The majority of this movie is CGI, and these characters go to pop culture locations and run into pop culture characters, and it was exhausting. And through their continued investigation, they find clues to the keys based on the big nerd's life goals and romantic interests, which you think would be something a child would find almost immediately. But again, there are literal armies of the smartest people alive who couldn't figure this shit out. For example, the dude had a love interest, and everything he did is tied around her. And nobody in the history of everything thought to investigate that. But they investigate apparently every other part of his life. So there's one point where they spew out a line like, "Oh my god, this random ass clue is a reference to The Shining, which was his 11th favorite horror movie. Let's go." And if you've ever wanted to see The Shining portrayed as an action movie, you can see that here. And in typical stereotype fashion, they discover that the big nerd's most prominent fear throughout his entire life, are you ready for this?
No.
Was kissing a girl.
Like, are they trying to make fun of their audience?
And the main character can relate because he's lonely too. And he teams up with a girl in the game, and she's very attractive in the game. And she's like, you don't know anything about me in real life. But of course she's attractive in real life too, because God forbid. And the villains are old, out-of-date corporate bigwigs who don't understand what life is really all about. Despite the movie telling us that life is really about immersing yourself in 80s pop culture as much as possible. And naturally, the last challenge involves an Atari 2600, which we get another 15-minute explanation of what an Atari 2600 is and how it included an Easter egg. And even though everyone is in a VR world, their real-world physical actions translate. So everyone is on these treadmills, and they have a bunch of bungee cords and stuff attached to these suits. And the expensive suits have force feedback, which is there to provide a deeper sense of realism. But when the main dude is being tortured in this virtual world, and his physical body is experiencing the same effects of this torture, why doesn't he just turn off his force feedback shit? It doesn't make any sense. And everyone's like, oh my god, like he's killing him. And it's like, just stop doing that. Overall, this is a movie that not only asks you to turn your brain off, but to accept the force feeding of how cool the author is with as many pop culture references as he can muster. And this was directed by Spielberg, which I don't understand. This felt like the most generic movie ever, and not something he would enjoy directing anyway.
Yeah, I always thought it was weird that it was him that did that movie.
This movie is a complete waste of time. I assume the book is too. I read Gwendy's Magic Feather from 2017, which is a sequel to Gwendy's Button Box, which I talked about last month, I think. This book was pretty disappointing. It was like someone who's trying to write like Stephen King, but did not have the same aptitude as Stephen King. And since Richard Chizmar wrote the first book with Stephen King, that makes sense. Gwendy is now an adult, and the Button Box comes back into her life, and she has to deal with it again, but now she knows what it's capable of. And where the first book focused on the box, this book was focused more on her life and the characters around her, which was a good move. But the plot felt like a Stephen King ripoff. For example, the ending to solve this mystery that's plaguing this town where kids are getting kidnapped. In the last 10 pages of the book, out of nowhere, she gains the ability to have psychic flashes by touching people, like the Dead Zone. And it comes out of nowhere, but neatly allows her to identify the culprit and end the story. It doesn't even cover how they get him. She's just looking at a news report later, and it's like, they got the guy. This book even references the Dead Zone in it.
That sounds great.
Like the first book, this had a very simple, a very explicit writing style, and it was not compelling. I was hoping for more, since she was an adult. And there's another book in the series, which Stephen King jumped back in to do, so I don't know. I might check it out, just because they're such short reads. And I played the first Final Fantasy from 1987. I played this out of the Pixel Remaster, which took 1 through 6, gave them visual, audio upgrades, kind of made them all look and sound more cohesive. And I haven't played 1 in a long time. Or at least I don't think I have. This isn't a game that sticks well in my mind, so every time I play it, it kind of feels like I'm going in fresh. There's a lot of creativity here. The story is very linear, but the story elements help it feel less tedious. Modern updates definitely help. If you want to go at this game from a purist standpoint and play it on an NES, be my guest, but that is a grind fest I am never going to sit through again. Remakes can be good, or they can be just god-awful. And I think this Pixel Remaster is good, at least once they've made those later updates. It's nice to be able to focus on the story of this game, since it is an RPG, and play it through a modern lens without sacrificing the core of the gameplay. My favorite part of the story is the twist at the end, where the main villain, who's deep in the past, was sent to the past by the Four Fiends, who are the other major antagonists of the game. And once they send him to the past, he sends them forwards to the game's present-day setting. And once they get there, they send him back to the deep past. So the whole thing happens indefinitely, and your party's ultimate goal is to stop this time loop. But in doing so, they effectively erase themselves from existence, I'm pretty sure. Sakaguchi knows how to tell a good story, and it's nice to be able to experience it without being hit in the face by the hardware and software limitations of the time. And that's everything I did this month. A lot of duds.
Yeah, but some of that stuff was interesting.
So thanks for sticking with us, and hopefully all of the Yakuza stuff doesn't get in the way. But I think it's going to take them at least a little while to find us.